we'll start this meeting. So just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to join us, and welcome to the second public open house towards developing a master plan for Hume Park. My name is Erica Mashig. I'm the manager of Parks and Open Space Planning, Design and Construction. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to kick off our meeting for the evening. Just head over to the next slide. Just wanting to give you a quick outline of what to expect this evening. I'll walk you through an overview of the agenda, and just a heads up, we're starting the meeting a couple minutes late, but we will aim to finish up at 8 p.m. on the dot. So just going through this agenda, we're going to start with our introduction and agenda, which here I am doing that right now, and I'll add a few housekeeping items to that. For our first 10 minutes, and then we'll move into a presentation, which will take about 20 minutes overall. And we'll be looking at 3 parts in that presentation. So first, refreshing our memories or sharing with our new participants just how we're thinking about the park in its parts due to its topography. We'll then share a summary of our phase 1 engagement process, so everything we've heard so far. And then we'll ask you some questions and get some feedback on the preliminary approaches that we're taking to the park master plan. And again, these have been developed on the input that we have received to date. We'll move into the next part of the meeting, and that's our small group discussions. And that's going to be about a 40-minute session. So we'll be magically transported into 2 or 3 virtual rooms to discuss the details of each of the park approaches that we'll be presenting this evening. We'll then all reunite into one big room, and our facilitator from each of the small groups will report back a summary of the discussions, and we'll conclude the meeting with an outline of our next steps. So that'll take about 20 minutes as the last part of the meeting. Just before we move on to the presentation, again, I'll just go through a couple of these housekeeping items. You're probably all experts on Zoom by now, given the year that we've had. But I'll just remind everyone, we are recording the presentation portion of this meeting tonight. The small group discussions will only be recorded manually on sticky notes and doodles. Please feel free to keep your camera off during the presentation portion of the open house, but please do remember to turn it back on as we move into our small group discussions. This portion of the meeting will be highly interactive, and keeping your camera on helps us feel connected, like we're in one room together. If you do experience any screen freeze, either through the presentation or the small groups, it does help to turn your camera off. Sometimes that resolves the issue. We are asking everyone to stay on mute during the presentation, and then when we move into our small group discussions, please do unmute. And lastly, for those who are familiar with Zoom, we won't be using the chat function tonight. Instead, we'll hold all of our questions and ideas and aspirations for discussion in our small groups later in the open house. So I'll just move into some quick introductions of the project team. We have a few consultants online tonight and city staff members just helping us facilitate and support this open house. So Nell Gashevitz is our Parks and Open Space Planner from the Parks and Recreation Department. We have Derek Lee, a partner at PWL, who will be presenting tonight and one of our facilitators. And from PWL, we also have facilitators Michelle Klogsy, David Stein, and Emily Blair. And of course, we will invite you all to introduce yourselves as we start into the small group discussions. And with that, I will hand it over to Derek.
Thank you very much, Erica. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time out of this sunny, beautiful day to spend with us. That really means a lot, and we're really hoping to get some of your feedback about this master plan. So we are sort of in the second public open house, and really the focus of this open house and conversation is really to focus on how should the master plan balance the many considerations, and what are the trade-offs between the various park features and programming that we see in Hume Park. And so there's a couple of key things I just wanted to go through very quickly here. And some of the themes are really to focus on protecting and enhancing the biodiversity of the park. This is something that we've heard from the stakeholders and the public in past engagements. We also developed 4 guiding principles and key objectives that we'll be going through. We want to look at current and future needs for the park. we want to focus on active and passive recreational uses within the park. We also recognize that there are already popular uses within Hume's Park. There's a lot of family and children's activities. There's a natural area of the bluffs and the lower reaches down to the river. And there's also a lot of active sports courts and sports fields that need to be looked at as well. We also recognize that we want to maximize mobility and access. And so developing a wayfinding and mobility strategy will be important. And we also recognize that this is a well-connected park to the surrounding neighborhood. And so that arrival experience of a variety of active and passive transportation modes is going to be of great consideration as we move through the planning process. So I'm just going to go to the next slide here. So just a bit of background here. I won't dwell on this too long, but this helps to place Hume Park. Obviously, it is on the border of the Brunette River, separating Coquitlam and New Westminster. You can see the surrounding neighborhood fabric, which are primarily single-family homes. And to the east, you'll notice this is the future development of Sapperton Green. And so that's currently the Amazon distribution warehouse site right now. But over the coming decades, there will be as many as 10,000 people moving in here. So this is sort of a high-rise development that will add a significant local residential population to Hume Park. Okay, just go down to the next slide. So really, what is a master plan? Well, a master plan is a long-term planning document. It's really a roadmap that'll help the city make decisions about the park in the next 20 years. It'll help guide sort of capital expenditures and the long-term planning and management decisions related to, managing the important ecological assets and the diverse recreational activities within the park. And so really the first phase of this planning process out of 4 phases, beginning with the inventory and analysis, that's where we kind of go in and understand kind of, what current assets are there within the park, how people are currently using the park, the geographical features and constraints. Then moving into phase 2, there's sort of the development of high-level planning directions. And so we're sort of straddling phase 2 and phase 3, which is really developing preliminary concepts. And that's really understanding kind of the various trade-offs and overlaying them and really coming up with the beginnings of a design for the park. And then that would then lead us into phase 4, which is the development of a final concept plan. And that's obviously taking the input from yourselves and the stakeholders and various groups within the community to help shape that plan. Okay. So in terms of where we are, the project started back in 2018. That's where phase 1, as we talked about, began with inventory and analysis. And then over the course of 2020 through to 2021, we conducted reviews with critical stakeholders in the public open house. This is where we were beginning to kind of understand kind of the programming requirements of the plan, and we're still discussing that. And we're now moving into this phase 3, which is the master plan development. And so, with the feedback received so far and now, we are getting into some different plan options. So the idea is that by the end of this year and the beginning of next year, we hope to, through continued engagement, then be able to present this to council for approval of the plan. So the findings, the key themes and objectives of this plan are really allowing us to kind of explore 4 emerging themes, if you will. The first theme is really around transportation. And this is really looking at how this park connects to the surrounding urban fabric, looking at the gateways, looking at access that supports a variety of different transportation needs, whether it's biking, pedestrian movement, vehicular movement, and parking. We also want to look at the internal circulation within the site. And so that is the trail connections between Upper Hume and Lower Hume. And you'll notice that, particularly within the forested escarpment, there's a whole variety of trail systems there that need to be managed, both formal and informal. There's also the ecology of the site, and this is one of the most defining features of the site in terms of its proximity to the Brunette River. It's a very picturesque site. It has a very strong and connected functional ecology, ecosystem rather. And so that's really important to protect. And then conversely to kind of the natural systems, we also have fairly intensive programming of Upper Hume Park with the sports courts and the sports fields, the water spray park, the pool, and the children's play area, among other things. So the other thing that we wanted to look at, and this is where we put out a survey, was to understand people's support of this park in terms of the guiding principles. And so the principles are listed here. And what we noticed from these various principles was that people generally agreed, either strongly or somewhat, with the guiding principles. And that was indicated in blue. In the red was those who neither agreed nor disagreed. So that was more neutral. And so we had a minority of folks that disagreed somewhat. And so really, this is in terms of these 4 principles, just reading them out here, the first one is really a neighborhood with a park, meeting the needs of the Saperton neighborhood, rather, with a park that is accessible and supports a diverse set of users and abilities and continues to serve as the heart of the community, to protect and enhance the natural systems and diversity of Hume Park. Thirdly, to ensure that the park is flexible, so the space we have can be used efficiently and adapt to changing needs. And fourthly, to maintain and enhance green connections that become places in and of themselves. We also found that there was some very useful feedback in terms of those respondents that described the ways they used the park. And so the large majority of people that we see here are really experiencing the park and place sort of the natural features in high priority or high value. We also saw the water play is quite significant among the playground, the dog leash area, and so forth. Sports courts are sort of lower down on the list, but still important to consider. And this was an interesting one as well. Which part of the park do you spend most of the time in? And unsurprisingly, a lot of people spend most of their time in the Upper Hume area, which is obviously where most of the program activities are. But about a third do spend time in the Lower Hume, with the balance of people in the Bluffs. We also saw that people really enjoyed views of the Brunette River. And so that becomes very important in terms of the defining character of the park and ensuring equitable access to the river. And the second one, it was sort of the nature and bird watching. And so we see that access to nature as sort of a guiding theme here. And then in this one, what do you do in Upper Hume? This was interesting as well. So lots of more active uses, with the largest group responding to their interest in playing in the playground and the spray park picnicking, the Hume Park pool, among other more active activities. Sports activities were important, but they are scoring a bit lower on the list, interestingly enough. And, a lot of people do feel that the parks and trails do support their ability to get around Hume Park, although the large majority felt that they were adequate. Some felt that it was doing very well, and a quarter were feeling like there were some challenges in terms of that access. Overall, how well does Hume Park support your needs, and how do you use the park? Well, the majority of folks felt that it did respond to their needs, and that may not be surprising because I think a lot of people do gravitate to this park because of the specific amenities it offers to suit their needs. So project work to date, just a little bit of a recap here. This is going back to May 27th, where we had our stakeholder workshop 2. And we did see, I'm not going to list off everything here, but we did get a variety of input in terms of how both the Upper Hume Park was used and how Lower Hume Park was used. And all this stuff is actually available on the website, I should say, as well. So if you want to delve into some of these comments, feel free to do so at your leisure. This as well is an interesting graphic that I won't get into in detail, but this does list out the variety of uses that are in the park. And so for those who are not used to looking at an aerial photo, this is Lower Hume here, where I'm circling with the Brunette River. And you can see kind of the bluffs as sort of this natural area here. And you can see the concentration of a lot of the activity that respondents had gravitated to in the survey in sort of the lower southwestern quadrant of the park. And you can get a real feel for this park in these photographs. It's a beautiful sort of verdant environment. The Brunette River right here is just a wonderful picturesque spot to be at. And there's a lot of ecological function that goes along with it too, right? So it's a balance of human access and natural habitat. Lots of open green space. I think that a lot of people use these fields quite passively, in addition to the occasional games that happen here, both baseball and the use of the football field. And the playground and the spray park is indeed two very popular attractors. And then the outdoor pool here is actually interesting. So we were aware that the community had placed some interest in keeping the pool operational. Unfortunately, COVID struck and it was closed this year, but it is a very interesting feature on site that's well used. So just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of the grade changes here, I know there's no scale on this elevation, but it does give you kind of the relative feel for the grade difference between Lower Hume and Upper Hume. It's probably about a 6-story grade change, just for comparison, with the Brunette River to the further left here. And so, you can imagine some of the challenges around universal accessibility between Upper and Lower Hume. You could also imagine some of the goat trails and how that's impacting the slope stability as well, and erosion. So those are some things to consider. So in terms of the constraints of the site, so we always, as landscape architects, when we're designing or doing inventory and analysis, we're always trying to understand what are the constraints that sort of provide the perimeters for what we have to work within. And so what you see in purple here is the natural buffer zone from the bluffs. And so that's a determining line that we're trying to keep all future programming out if it's changing. We have a large area of existing tree canopy, and those are the trees kind of denoted here in green. Lots of areas of existing trees, particularly around the playgrounds and splash pads and so forth in here, and a lot of flexible open space on the Upper Hume. So these are things that we have to consider. The circulation network as well is important, and that the wayfinding really needs to be enhanced and accessibility improved throughout this whole Upper Hume area. Sometimes it's not quite apparent in terms of how you arrive here from Braid Street or from the neighborhood. It seems to be quite sort of embedded within the neighborhood, particularly coming in from the south. So what that led to, what those identified constraints lead to is really two scenarios, if you will, two different site approaches. And this is actually going to be kind of the point of conversation in our breakout groups, both for Upper Hume and Lower Hume. But in Upper Hume, we wanted to look at one scenario that focused on flexible recreation. So that meant, creating something where it wasn't really driven by regulation-sized courts. We recognized that different activities could be used at different times, could be conducted at different times of the day. There could be an overlay of different overlapping activities within this sort of a scenario. Whereas approach 1B was focused more on what would happen if we kept everything that was regulation size, the 2 ball diamonds, the rugby pitch, the regulation sports field, the multi-court sports area, including the lacrosse pucks and the tennis courts. And that then sort of drives the site planning a little bit more, because you have more defined dimensions that you have to work through. So the first one, there's a little bit more flexible breathing room for a lot of the activities, such as the splash pad, an enlarged play area, an enlarged or enhanced aquatic area. The flexible multi-court area could be, you could imagine half-court basketball overlaid on top of, an area where people could play ball hockey informally or other things. So those are things that we really want to get into and get your input on in greater detail. And I should also say that we wanted to look at these through the lens of transportation, how the circulation works, how these support the ecological function of the site, and how this meets the programming needs of the surrounding community. And then moving into sort of the Lower Hume in the bluffs, the site planning approach will integrate passive uses and ecological enhancements with circulation and desired current and future uses. And so you can see that we've kind of combined the bluffs and Lower Hume together. And you can get a sense from these snapshots of the pathways and the grade changes that need to be negotiated, but also the views that are afforded through here of sort of the lower reaches of the river. There's also washrooms and picnic shelter, a washroom and a picnic shelter and field. Interestingly enough, there is a ball diamond right now in Lower Hume, not used tremendously, but there. And of course, the Burnett River. And so when we begin to look at the considerations of the Lower Hume, this is where it's important to see that, we have the fish-bearing river, so there's a huge ecological sensitivity and function with that. There's the retaining of existing trees, the slope stability of the bank that we talked about, and the long-term consideration of programming that might need to be removed from this area. So the circulation network that's not accessible and must be improved, the wayfinding. And so how do we balance those passive open spaces such as the lower field and the preservation enhancement of natural features, and managing transportation and the variety of modes that can access the park, particularly the access road coming in from the northwest with this very informal sort of gravel surface parking area. And so in terms of this, we wanted to sort of focus on these two scenarios, which we'll get into in our groups. And the first one is really to expand the ecology of the site. So you'll notice that maybe there's an opportunity to reduce the size of this flexible open space and to maybe introduce things like wetlands and sort of allow people to access a new kind of expanded ecology to the site, including new trail networks. And maybe also decommissioning a portion of the land of the flexible lawn to wildflowers and maybe pollinator meadows. We might also want to consolidate some of the trail systems going up the bluffs. And alternatively, the second approach is maybe to expand the open space, or at least to maintain it, and allow people to sort of access the river with maybe some viewpoints and both along the river, but maybe also along the top of the bluff as well, with maybe a cantilevered view deck, and also maintaining and enhancing kind of the picnic shelter, maybe with a little bit more of a gathering area and keeping the washroom. And so that's a bit of an overview. And what we wanted to do now is to get into our breakout groups and discussion. There'll be lots of opportunity to delve into these various approaches in more detail and to get your feedback on this, which is really important. So I will leave it there.